Chapter 1. The Breaking Point. The espresso machine screamed, like it was dying, a sound I'd come to associate with my own spiraling panic. 6:47 a.m. 13 minutes late. My hands trembled as I tied the crisp white apron around my waist, the fabric suddenly feeling like a noose. The Obsidian Lounge wasn't just any restaurant. It was elite. Expensive. The kind of place where CEOs and diplomats conducted business over $200 steaks and vintage wine. Which meant one thing: Victor Castellano, our manager, had absolutely no patience for tardiness. I'd overslept because I'd been up until 2 in the morning, working my other job, data entry for an insurance firm, trying to scrape together enough money to escape my mother's apartment. We lived in a shoebox in Hell's Kitchen, and I was 24 years old, still sleeping on a twin bed with springs that poked into my ribs. The morning light hadn't even broken over Manhattan when I'd bolted from the subway, my heart hammering against my ribs. Ivy. The voice cut through the kitchen chaos like a blade. Victor stood in the service corridor, his tailored suit pristine, his hairline receding in the way men like him never acknowledged. His eyes pale blue and utterly devoid of warmth locked onto mine. "You were supposed to be here at 6:30, he said, his tone conversational in a way that made my stomach drop. "Do you understand what that means?" "I'm so sorry, Victor. The train broke down, and I don't care about excuses, Ivy. I care about standards." He was holding a coffee cup. One of the ceramic ones from the back station, fresh brew. Probably from the premium blend we reserved for VIP tables. Steam curled from the rim. I'd served enough cappuccinos and lattes in this restaurant to recognize the exact moment his expression shifted. The tightening at the corners of his mouth. The flex of his fingers. That moment when a human being decides to stop pretending. "This is your 4th offense in 3 months, he said, stepping closer. I stepped back. "I know. And I." The liquid hit me before I finished the sentence. Scalding, sudden. Everywhere. It poured down the front of my face, my neck, soaking into my white blouse and burning my collarbone. The pain was sharp and immediate, a shock of heat that stole my breath. I gasped, stumbling backward, my hands flying up instinctively to my face. "That," Victor said coldly, "is how I serve consequences." The kitchen staff froze. Every single person, the sous chefs, the line cooks, the dishwashers, they all stopped moving. Silence crashed through the space like ice water. My eyes watered, my skin burned. But what hurt more, what cut deeper, was the humiliation. The absolute, crushing knowledge that everyone had seen it. That I'd been reduced to something breakable. I reached for a towel with shaking hands, my face burning hotter than the coffee ever could. "You know what?" Victor's voice followed me. "Don't bother coming in tomorrow. I'm tired of looking at you." Fired. Just like that. I couldn't speak, my throat had closed around the words that wanted to pour out anger, tears, a scream that would shatter every glass in this restaurant. But I'd learned long ago that people like me, waitresses, service workers, invisible people, we didn't get to have outbursts. We got to smile through abuse and accept it as the cost of survival. So I cleaned myself off in the bathroom, stared at the redness spreading across my collarbone and neck, and walked out through the kitchen entrance, the back door. The way we always left, unseen, unheard, forgotten. The October air hit my wet skin and I shivered, my blouse clinging to me like a second skin. I had $43 in my bank account. I was still shaking when I pushed through the front entrance of the Obsidian an hour later, not to beg for my job back, but to grab my things from the employee locker. I couldn't face that yet. I just needed my jacket, my dignity, and to disappear. The lunch service was beginning. Servers glided across the dining room like dancers, their movements precise, their smiles vacant. The light from the floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the space in shades of amber and gray. Expensive. Controlled. Everything I was not. "Excuse me, miss?" The hostess, a willowy blonde named Chelsea, caught my arm as I tried to slip past toward the back. "We have a VIP section opening up. Mr. Castellano needs the A-team for the private tables." Private tables meant bigger tips. Bigger tips meant. I closed my eyes. "I'm not working today," I said quietly. Her face fell. "Oh. Everyone's talking about the coffee thing. Look, I'm sorry that happened. But the private section really needs. I said I'm not working. The coldness in my own voice surprised me. I pulled my arm away and made a beeline for the employee area, my wet clothes sticking to me, my skin still throbbing. The shame had transformed into something else now, a quiet, dangerous anger that had nowhere to go. When I emerged with my leather jacket and my tips from yesterday stuffed into a folded envelope, I was done. Completely, utterly done with this restaurant. With Victor. With the humiliation of serving people who looked through me. That's when I noticed the private dining section. Through the frosted glass partition, I could see silhouettes. 3 tables, cordoned off from the main dining room. Private, exclusive, the kind of clientele that didn't want to be seen. And at the center table, backlit by the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, was a man I'd never seen before. Even from a distance, he commanded space. Broad shoulders in a tailored charcoal suit, dark hair swept back from a sharp jawline. He was flanked by 2 other men, larger, heavier, with the unmistakable bearing of security, bodyguards. The man in the center wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the dining room, at the servers, and then impossibly his gaze swept across the frosted glass and locked directly onto mine. Even through the partition, I felt it. A collision, a spark. His eyes were dark, predatory. They held the kind of intensity that made my breath catch and my skin prickle with a warning my body understood before my mind did. This was a man who was used to taking what he wanted, a man for whom the word no was probably a quaint concept. I shouldn't have looked back, but I did. And the corner of his mouth tilted upward in the smallest smile, not kind, not warm, but curious in a way that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Then Chelsea stepped in front of me, babbling about shift schedules, and the moment shattered. But it was already too late. Because even as I pushed toward the exit, my wet clothes clinging to me, my dignity in pieces, my job gone, that man was still watching. I felt the weight of his attention like a physical touch against my back. And the dangerous part? I wanted him to keep looking. Chapter 2. The Pull of Gravity. I didn't sleep that night. My apartment was silent except for the distant hum of traffic outside and the occasional creak of pipes from the neighboring units. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment over and over, the feeling of his gaze, the way it had ignited something inside me that I'd thought was long dead. At 3 a.m., I finally gave up pretending to rest and opened my laptop. If I was going to spiral, I might as well do it productively. I needed a new job desperately. $43 wouldn't last a week. And my mother had already given me an ultimatum: find a way to contribute to rent or find a new place to live. 30 days, that's all I had. The job boards were sparse at 3 a.m. Most positions required experience I didn't have or certifications I couldn't afford. I was scrolling mindlessly through administrative roles when a name caught my eye. Obsidian Holdings. Executive assistant position. The description was vague. High-level position, private office, competitive salary, discretion required. No specific company details, just a contact number and an email address. Obsidian. Same name as the restaurant. My instinct, the part of me that had kept me safe in this city, screamed at me to close the tab. Coincidences like that didn't happen by accident. But desperation is a powerful drug. I applied at 3:47 a.m. without thinking too much about it, using a template cover letter and my experience as a client-facing professional. Then I closed the laptop and finally fell asleep to the sound of sirens wailing outside. The phone rang at 9 a.m. Not an email, not a text. An actual phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Is this Ivy Mercer? The voice was male, professional, with a slight accent I couldn't place. I sat up too quickly, my heart already racing. Yes. This is she. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Dominic Ashford. He's reviewed your application and would like to meet with you. Today, if possible, 2 p.m. at the Obsidian offices in Tribeca. Dominic Ashford. The name meant nothing to me. But there was something in the tone of the caller's voice, a deference, a careful formality that suggested I should probably know who he was. Yes. Of course. 2 p.m. works. After the call ended, I immediately did what any sane person would do. I Googled him. What I found made my blood run cold. Dominic Ashford, 32 years old. Estimated net worth in the billions. Owner of Obsidian Holdings, a conglomerate that included everything from restaurants to real estate, to import-export businesses. Handsome in that dangerous way that made photographers' cameras follow him, mysterious in a way that suggested he actively cultivated the mystery. But there was more. In the darker corners of the internet, the Reddit threads, the conspiracy blogs, the whispered allegations, people said things about him. Organized crime, money laundering, connections to families with names like Castellano and Moretti. Nothing proven, nothing concrete. Just rumors that swirled around him like smoke. The man I'd felt watching me through the frosted glass. I spent the next 4 hours in a state of controlled panic. I showered. I found my one professional outfit, black blazer, navy slacks. The blouse I'd worn the day Victor threw coffee in my face. Now freshly laundered. I straightened my dark hair and applied makeup with trembling hands. I looked competent. Professional. Like someone who belonged in the offices of a man worth billions. Like someone who wasn't terrified out of her mind. The Obsidian building in Tribeca was exactly what I expected, all soaring glass and steel. The kind of architecture that whispered about power and old money. The lobby was pristine, dominated by a massive obsidian sculpture that gave the company its name. Dark, polished, beautiful and sharp all at once. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like descending into something from which I might never escape. When the doors opened, there was a single corridor, minimalist, expensive, illuminated by soft hidden lighting. At the far end was a door. Behind that door, presumably, was my fate. A woman who looked like she'd been sculpted from marble sat at the desk nearest the elevator. "You must be Ivy. Go straight through. Mr. Ashford is expecting you." Her tone suggested she knew something I didn't. There was pity in her eyes. Or maybe it was warning. I moved toward the door on legs that felt disconnected from my body. The office was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Hudson River, the light falling across a space that had been designed with obsessive care. Dark wood. Leather. Modern art that probably cost more than my mother's apartment. And behind an expansive mahogany desk, in a chair that faced the window, was him. Dominic Ashford. He turned slowly, deliberately, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. As if he knew I would come. His suit was charcoal gray today, custom-tailored, expensive in a way that went beyond fabric and into pure power. His eyes were exactly as I remembered, dark, assessing, dangerous. But in daylight, through the safety of a desk between us, I could see more. The sharp cut of his jaw. The scar that ran along his temple, barely visible. The way his presence filled every inch of the room. "Ivy." He said my name like it was a word he'd been tasting in his mouth for days. "Thank you for coming." His voice was different here, still commanding, still low, but with an undertone of something softer, something that sounded almost like relief. I said nothing. I couldn't. My vocal cords had apparently decided this was a good time to betray me. He stood and walked around the desk, with the ease of a man who'd never questioned his right to move through the world. He didn't offer his hand. Instead, he leaned against the desk, close enough that I could smell cologne, something expensive and dark, like cedarwood and smoke. "You were at the Obsidian yesterday," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I managed. "I worked there, briefly. I heard about what happened with Victor." His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Anger, maybe, or cold calculation. "That's unfortunate." "Unfortunate?" The word escaped before I could stop it. He threw hot coffee in my face and fired me. "I'm aware." He smiled, then a thin, predatory thing. "Victor Castellano is no longer managing the Obsidian. He was terminated this morning. Effective immediately." I blinked. "What? You can't just." "I can do whatever I want, Ivy." He said it simply, as fact, not boast. That's the advantage of owning the building, the restaurant, the company he worked for. I can make an example of any man who thinks he can degrade someone under my roof. The implication hung between us, heavy and dark. He'd fired Victor. For me. A stranger. A girl he'd glimpsed for 5 seconds through frosted glass. "Why would you?" "Because I saw you. he interrupted, and his voice dropped lower, more intimate. And the moment I did, everything changed. Everything. He stepped closer, and I should have backed away. I should have run. This was a man connected to organized crime, a man who solved problems by removing them, a man whose world operated under rules I didn't understand. But I didn't move. I don't know what you want from me, I whispered. Neither do I yet, he said, and there was something honest in that admission, something vulnerable beneath the predator. But I know I want you to find out. Work for me, Ivy. Be my executive assistant. Stay close. Stay. It was phrased as an offer. But we both knew it was a command dressed in velvet. And if I say no? He tilted his head, studying me. You won't. The arrogance should have infuriated me. Instead, it thrilled me. Because he was right. I wouldn't say no, not because he was powerful or because I needed the job, though both were true. But because that moment at the restaurant had awakened something in me, a hunger. A reckless desire to understand the man who'd chosen to own me the moment he saw me. When do I start? I asked. His smile widened. It was the smile of a wolf that had just spotted prey. Now, he said. Come. There's so much I want to show you. And as he led me back out into the corridor, his hand barely touching the small of my back, I knew with absolute certainty. I had just made a bargain with the devil. And the devil had no intention of letting me go. Chapter 3, The Cracks in the Armor. The first week working for Dominic Ashford was like living inside a controlled descent into madness. My job, it turned out, was purposefully vague. I answered phones. I organized his calendar. I attended meetings I didn't understand. Sitting in glass conference rooms, while men in expensive suits discussed shipments and acquisitions, and things that probably weren't legal. But mostly, I existed in close proximity to him. That seemed to be the entire point. He would appear in the doorway of my office, a small, elegant space, adjacent to his, and say things like, "Come. Lunch." Or, "You're watching me. Why?" Or, on one memorable afternoon, "What color are your eyes?" I keep forgetting, and it's starting to feel dangerous. That last one had made my breath catch. Because it revealed something, that he thought about me when I wasn't there, that I occupied space in his mind. By day 7, I was simultaneously exhausted and electrified. Every interaction felt loaded. Every glance felt like foreplay. Every time his hand brushed mine reaching for the same document, I felt the electricity like a shock. But I still didn't know him. The man in the office was all control and command. The man at the restaurant had been watchful and curious. I'd glimpsed neither the human beneath the expensive suit nor the darkness everyone whispered about on the internet. That changed on a Thursday night at 11 p.m. I was leaving late, gathering my things as the city lights flickered below the building. The office had emptied hours ago. Just the night security team remained, scattered throughout the building like ghosts. Dominic's office door was still lit, his silhouette visible through the frosted glass. He always left after me, or so I thought. As I passed his office, the door opened. Stay. It wasn't a request. I turned to find him in the doorway, loosening his tie. His jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms that were probably stronger than my entire body. But what struck me was his face. He looked exhausted. The mask had slipped slightly, I could see tension around his eyes. A heaviness in the set of his jaw. It's late, I said, but I was already stepping toward his office. I don't care about the time, I care about you leaving. He moved into the space, closer to me, and I realized I'd never truly been alone with him. Not like this. Not with the city sleeping below us and nothing but glass and darkness surrounding us. What did you need? My voice was steadier than my hands. Instead of answering, he walked to the window and stared out at the glittering skyline. Manhattan at night was beautiful, all light and promise and infinite possibility. But he looked at it like it was a problem he hadn't yet solved. Do you know what I do? He asked suddenly. The question hung in the darkness between us. You own businesses, I said carefully. Real estate. Restaurants. Yes. He didn't turn around. And other things. Things that require men who understand the value of loyalty. Things that exist in the spaces between the law and necessity. Do you understand what I'm saying? Ivy? My mouth went dry. This was at the moment where he confirmed what I'd suspected all along. This was the moment I was supposed to be afraid, to run. I didn't move. I think so, I whispered. He finally turned to face me, and the expression in his eyes was raw in a way I'd never seen before. Vulnerable, almost broken. Then why didn't you? He asked. Why didn't you run from me the moment you found out who I was? I don't know, I admitted. He moved toward me with slow, deliberate steps. Because you felt it too. The moment I saw you through that glass, something happened. Something that shouldn't have been possible. I've built my entire life on control, Ivy. On understanding every variable, every outcome. But you're the first thing I've ever encountered that I can't predict. He was close now, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him, close enough that I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the evidence of 1,000 sleepless nights, the weight of 1,000 decisions that had probably ruined people. What do you want from me? I asked. I don't know yet, he said, and the honesty in it was devastating. But I know I can't stop wanting it. Can't stop wanting you. His hand came up, fingers brushing my cheek with surprising gentleness. The touch was electric but controlled, like he was afraid of what might happen if he lost restraint. This is a dangerous world, he continued, his voice dropping lower. And I'm a dangerous man. You should fear me, Ivy. Part of you does. I can see it in how you hold your breath when I get close, how your pupils dilate, how you tremble. I'm not afraid of you, I lied. Yes, you are, he smiled sadly. But you're more afraid of what not having me would feel like. And that's going to be both the making and the breaking of us. His hand fell away, and he stepped back, a deliberate retreat that felt like abandonment. I received word tonight that the Moretti family is moving into Manhattan territory, he said, his voice shifting back into business mode. It's a threat. It's also an opportunity. But it means things are about to become very complicated. And I need to know right now, while you still have a choice whether you're in or out. What does it mean? I asked. It means you become part of my world. Fully. It means you see things you can't unsee. Know things you can't unknow. It means you're protected, but you're also mine. And it means that if anyone thinks you're my weakness, they will use you to destroy me. He paused, letting that weight settle. So, are you in, or are you out? The rational part of me, the small, still functioning piece of my brain that hadn't been completely hijacked by the dark magnetism of this man, screamed at me to walk out. To go home to my mother's apartment and the twin bed with the broken springs. To take any job, any life, anything but this. But that piece of me was small, insignificant. What was louder was the desire. The hunger I'd felt since the moment I'd seen him watching me through frosted glass. The feeling that I was meant for something darker than my current life. That this man, ruthless, dangerous, broken in ways I was only beginning to understand, was my gravity. I'm in, I said. And then he was kissing me. It wasn't soft. It wasn't gentle. It was claiming, consuming, the kiss of a man who'd just won a war, and was celebrating by branding the spoils of victory. His hands tangled in my hair, pulling me closer, and I tasted something dark on his lips, whiskey, probably, and something uniquely him. When he finally pulled away, both of us breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. God, you're going to destroy me, he whispered. Maybe, I breathed. But you'll deserve it. He laughed, a real laugh. Unexpected and genuine. It made him look younger. Dangerous in a different way. Yes, he agreed. I probably will. And then the moment shattered. His phone buzzed. Once. Twice. 3 times in rapid succession. His expression hardened immediately. The vulnerability sealed away like it had never existed. There's been a complication, he said, already moving toward his desk. Pack a bag. You're coming with me. Where are we going? Somewhere safe, because the Moretti family just made their first move and they've made a critical mistake. He looked at me, and the man I'd just kissed was gone. In his place was the predator I'd glimpsed at the restaurant. They touched something of mine. Chapter 4, Wolves at the Door. The safe house was a penthouse in the Upper East Side, a space so removed from the world below that it felt like we were floating in the clouds. Everything was white. Marble floors, modern furniture in shades of cream and silver, walls that seemed to stretch on forever. Windows overlooked Central Park, the trees now in late October descent, all gold and rust and dying beauty. It was gorgeous in the way a museum is gorgeous, carefully curated, emotionally sterile, a space designed to contain people rather than welcome them. Dominic had barely spoken to me during the drive. His jaw was clenched, his hands gripping the steering wheel with enough force to turn his knuckles white. Twice, he'd taken calls, conversations conducted in Italian so rapid and harsh that I couldn't follow them, though I picked up certain words. Moretti, tradimento, sangue, betrayal, blood. You'll stay here, he'd said as we entered the penthouse. Don't leave. Don't open the doors. Don't answer any calls except from me. Understood? I'd nodded, but I was terrified in a way I hadn't been before. This wasn't the controlled danger of his office. This was real, immediate, the kind of danger that involved men with guns and families with blood feuds that stretched back decades. Now it was 2 a.m., and I was sitting on the edge of the pristine white bed in the master bedroom, listening to Dominic argue with someone in hushed tones in the living room. I don't care if it was sloppy. His voice cut through the apartment, sharp as broken glass. The Morettis sent a message. They marked one of my warehouses. They want me to know they're here. They want me to react. A pause. Then, because reaction is what destroys careful men. And I'm not careful, Antonio. I'm strategic. There's a difference. Another pause. No. She stays. She doesn't leave the penthouse under any circumstances. If anything happens to her, everyone involved dies. Make sure our people understand that. My stomach dropped. He was talking about me. I was a complication, a liability, something to be protected only because it was strategically useful to protect me. The conversation continued for another hour. Dominic's voice grew harder, more clipped. At one point, I heard the crash of something breaking a glass, maybe, or a vase. Then nothing but the hum of the city outside and the sound of my own heartbeat. When he finally came to bed, it was 3:47 a.m. I pretended to be asleep, listening as he moved through the darkness with practiced silence. The bed dipped as he lay down beside me, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. Then his arm came around my waist, pulling me back against his chest. I know you're awake, he said quietly. You hold your breath when you're trying to hide from me. I turned to face him, and in the darkness, I could barely make out his features. But I could feel the tension radiating from him like heat. What happened? I asked. Business, he said. The kind that doesn't concern you. Doesn't concern me? I sat up slightly, anger cutting through fear. You just told someone that if anything happens to me, they all die. How is that not concerning me? He was silent for a moment. Then, because you're mine now, Ivy. And anything that's mine is protected. That's not sentiment, that's policy. The words should have made me feel cherished. Instead, they made me feel owned. I'm not a possession, I said. No. He pulled me back down, his arm settling across my waist again. You're worse. You're important. And that makes you dangerous to everything I've built. Then why? Because I would burn everything down for you. That's what terrifies me. He said it into the darkness, and his voice was stripped of all artifice. I don't do sentiment, Ivy. I don't do weakness. But since you walked into that restaurant, I've been making decisions based on you. Illogical decisions. Dangerous decisions. He shifted, and his hand came up to cup my face in the darkness. The Moretti family sent men to threaten one of my businesses tonight. Not to take it, not to negotiate, just to threaten. It was a test. They're trying to see how I'll react, what my vulnerabilities are. He paused. And now I know they know about you. Ice crystallized in my bloodstream. What does that mean? I whispered. It means they'll use you. It means I have to anticipate them. It means I have to be ruthless. He kissed my forehead, a gesture so tender it contradicted everything he'd just said. There's a man, he continued, Marcus Venn. He works for me, but he's been feeding information to the Morettis. I found out an hour ago. By dawn, he'll have outlived his usefulness. The implication was clear. Dominic was going to have him killed. You can't. I can. I will. And if you're smart, you won't ask me to spare him. His hand tightened slightly against my face, and I realized I was holding my breath again. This is who I am, Ivy. This is the world you said yes to. Not the office. Not the expensive suit. Not the man who kisses you like you're something precious. This, the man who solves problems by removing them. The man who would order execution the way most people order coffee. I should have been horrified. I should have screamed. I should have realized that I'd made a catastrophic mistake. Instead, I found myself thinking about Victor, who'd thrown scalding coffee in my face without a second thought. About how Dominic had fired him with a single phone call. About how in this world, there was finally someone willing to use his power to protect me, even if that protection came wrapped in darkness. Will he suffer? I asked quietly. Something flickered in Dominic's expression: surprise, maybe. Or approval. Do you want him to? I don't know, I admitted. I'm trying to understand what kind of person this makes me, if I can accept what you are without falling apart. And can you? I thought about the kiss in his office. About the vulnerability in his voice when he'd said I was going to destroy him. About the fact that despite everything, despite the danger, despite the ruthlessness, despite knowing exactly what he was, I still wanted to be close to him. Yes, I said. But I need you to let me in more. I need you to stop treating me like I'm fragile. He moved then, pressing his body against mine, and I felt the hardness of him, muscle and tension and controlled violence barely contained beneath skin. You're asking for something you can't handle, he whispered. Let me decide that, I said. For a moment, nothing. Then he was kissing me again, but differently this time, slower, more deliberate. His hands moved over me with intention, mapping territory. When he pulled away, his breath was ragged. Tomorrow, you're going to see something that changes everything, he said. A part of my world that I've never shown anyone. After that, there's no going back. Do you understand? I understand. Say it, he commanded. Say you want this. Say you want me, even knowing what I'm capable of. I want you, I breathed. I want this. All of it. He rolled me onto my back, his body pressing down onto mine, and I realized with absolute certainty that the point of no return had already passed. I hadn't just entered his world. I'd surrendered to it. And somewhere in the penthouse, his men were preparing to make a man disappear. Chapter 5, The Breaking Point. I didn't sleep that night. Dominic had left the bed at some point, moving to the living room where I could hear him making calls in low, clipped Italian, discussing logistics, arranging details, deciding a man's fate with the same tone he might use to order breakfast. By dawn, I was sitting on the marble balcony overlooking Central Park, wrapped in one of his shirts, which hung to mid-thigh and smelled like him, trying to reconcile the man who'd held me tenderly with the man orchestrating violence in the next room. He found me there as the sun crested the horizon, painting the park in shades of rose gold. You're thinking too much, he said, handing me a cup of coffee. I can hear it from inside. I took the cup, grateful for something to do with my hands. What happened to Marcus? Dominic settled into the chair beside me, his expression unreadable. He's gone. Just like that, gone. A man who'd been alive yesterday was now erased from existence because he'd made the mistake of being disloyal to Dominic Ashford. Did he? I couldn't finish the question. Did he beg for his life? Yes. Did it matter? No. The brutal honesty should have horrified me. Instead, it grounded me. There was no pretense here, no false gentleness. Just the truth of who he was. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you asked to be let in. You asked me to stop treating you like you're fragile. He turned to face me, and the morning light caught the scar at his temple. Well, this is the inside, Ivy. This is what it looks like. Blood and choices and the kind of loyalty that only comes from knowing the price of disloyalty. And what's my price? I asked quietly. What happens if I betray you? Something dangerous flashed across his face. You won't, but if I did, then I would spend the rest of my life hunting you. And when I found you, I would make you understand, in exquisite detail, what it means to take something that belongs to me. The words should have terrified me. They did, on some level. But beneath the fear was something else, a dark thrill at being wanted so absolutely. At being important enough to inspire that kind of possessive rage. I set the coffee down and turned to face him fully. Who were you before all of this? I asked. Before you were Dominic Ashford, Mafia boss. Who were you? He was quiet for a long moment, watching the park below as if the answer might be written in the trees. I was nothing, he finally said. My father was a banker who laundered money for the Castellano family. My mother was beautiful and addicted to heroin. They died when I was 16, murder-suicide. He shot her, then himself. I was in the other room. The emptiness in his voice was worse than any emotion could have been. After that, I had a choice: disappear. Or use what I had: intelligence, ruthlessness, a complete absence of mercy to claw my way up. The Castellano family took me in, trained me. By 25, I was running their entire New York operation. By 30, I'd cut them out and taken everything for myself. He finally looked at me, and his eyes held something raw and wounded. So the man I was before, he's dead, Ivy. And the man I am now, the man who just had someone executed for betrayal, he's what survived. And I'm never, ever going to be anything else. Something inside me shifted. Not love. I wasn't naive enough to pretend this was love. But understanding, recognition. This man and I were both broken in similar ways. By circumstance, by trauma, by the knowledge that the world was fundamentally cruel and indifferent. I reached over and took his hand, threading my fingers through his. I'm not going anywhere, I said. He pulled me onto his lap, and his arms wrapped around me with an intensity that bordered on painful. You say that now, he whispered into my hair, but you don't understand what loving me costs. Then show me. What followed was hours of confession disguised as interrogation. He wanted to know everything about me, my childhood, my dreams, my weaknesses. He asked with the precision of a man trying to map the internal landscape of someone he was determined to own completely. Your mother, he said at one point. Why do you stay with her? Because she's my mother. Because despite everything, I love her. Even though she treats you like a burden? The accuracy of it made me flinch. Family doesn't work like that. It's not conditional. Mine was, he said coldly. My father's family cut him off when he married beneath himself. When he died, they didn't come to the funeral. When I took over the operation, I made sure every single one of them understood the meaning of betrayal. He said it without any apparent emotion, but I felt the rage underneath. Decades of rage, carefully cultivated into the kind of cold fury that could order executions at 3 a.m. You're different, he continued, studying me. You have this capacity for grace I don't understand. For forgiveness. For seeing the good in people. I'm not seeing the good in you, I said. I'm seeing what's there. Which is something different entirely. By late afternoon, we hadn't left the balcony. The city sprawled below us, indifferent to the intensity of our conversation. At one point, he fed me from his plate. At another, he braided my hair with surprising gentleness. Small acts of intimacy that contradicted the nature of what he was. The Moretti family is making their move in 2 days, he said as the sun began to set. There's a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum. Neutral ground. They'll be there, trying to negotiate territory. I have to be there, which means I'm going with you, I finished. No, you're not. Yes, I am. I sat up, turning to face him. You said I was yours. You said anyone who thinks I'm your weakness will use me. So I come with you. I'm not a weakness if I'm at your side. I'm an asset. His expression hardened. You have no idea what you're asking for. There will be men there who would kill you without hesitation. Men who would use you to hurt me. Then teach me, I said. Teach me how to survive in your world. Teach me how to be valuable instead of vulnerable. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Vulnerability, maybe, or fear. The fear of a man who was starting to understand that he'd created something he couldn't control. If I teach you, he said quietly, there's no going back. You become complicit in everything I do. You become part of the machinery. I already am, I said. I just want to know how to operate it instead of being operated on. He pulled me close then, and his kiss was desperate, the kiss of a man drowning and unsure whether I was the life raft or the current pulling him under. God forgive me, he breathed against my lips. I should let you go. I should put you on a plane, and erase you from my life. But you won't. I whispered. No, he agreed. I won't. And as the sun set over Central Park, I realized I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I was no longer just in his world. I was becoming part of him. And in 2 days, everyone would know it. Chapter 6, The Architect's Design. The dress was black and expensive and made me feel like someone I wasn't. Dominic had arranged it, a couture gown that had been fitted in a single afternoon, tailored to my body like a second skin. The neckline plunged. The back was lower still. It was the kind of dress designed to make a statement. I belong to someone. Look but don't touch. He stood in the doorway of the penthouse's master bedroom, watching me as I adjusted the diamond necklace he'd placed around my throat. The diamonds were cold, heavy, impossible to ignore. A collar disguised as jewelry. You look like a queen, he said. I look like a possession, I replied, but I didn't remove the necklace. He crossed the room and spun me to face him, his hands settling at my waist. The Moretti family will be at the gala, so will the Castellano family, the Rossini family, and at least a dozen other minor players. They'll all be watching you. They'll all be trying to figure out what you mean to me. He tilted my chin up, forcing me to meet his gaze. Can you handle that? I don't know, I said honestly. Can you? I already have, he said. Everyone in this world knows you're mine. That makes you untouchable. But there was something in his voice, a certainty that felt rehearsed, planned. It nagged at me as we drove to the Met. As we climbed the marble steps and entered the glittering world of Manhattan's criminal elite dressed in Valentino and carrying themselves with the assured violence of people accustomed to getting what they wanted. The gala was a masterpiece of controlled chaos. Waiters circulated with champagne. The Metropolitan Museum's Egyptian wing had been transformed into something between a temple and a hunting ground. Spotlights illuminated the massive statues, casting shadows across the faces of men and women worth billions. Dominic kept his hand at the small of my back, steering me through conversations conducted entirely in subtext. He would introduce me as his associate, and watch as the men tried to determine my actual function. Wife? Mistress? Hostage? The ambiguity was intentional. At one point, a man with cold gray eyes approached us. Middle-aged, scarred, carrying himself with the authority of someone accustomed to command. Dominic, the man said, his accent thick. You've brought the girl. Interesting choice. This was a Moretti. I could feel it in the way everyone around us subtly shifted, creating space. A power play masquerading as greeting. Antonio, Dominic said, his tone pleasant and deadly. I wanted you to meet Ivy. She's important to me. The gray-eyed man studied me with the intensity of someone appraising merchandise. Pretty. Young. Useful for leverage. Something dark flashed across Dominic's face. She's not leverage. No? The man smiled, and it was the smile of a predator. Then why did you recruit her from my warehouse? The world tilted. I'm sorry, I heard myself say, though my voice sounded distant, unreal. Dominic's hand tightened at my waist, but he didn't deny it. The Obsidian, Antonio continued, clearly enjoying himself. That restaurant was always ours, Dominic. Your father, rest his soul, stole it from us years ago. We've been negotiating its return for months. But then you had an epiphany, didn't you? You realized you could use that little waitress as a plant. Get her close to you. Use her to gather information about my operations. My head was spinning. What is he talking about? He's lying, Dominic said. But his voice had lost its warmth. Get the car, we're leaving. Am I? I pulled away from him, my hands trembling. Because it sounds like you picked me at that restaurant intentionally. You saw me through that glass, and instead of it being some romantic moment, you were identifying an asset. Ivy. How many times? I demanded, my voice rising. Around us, people were pretending not to watch while watching intently. How many times did you use me? When you kissed me, were you practicing? When you held me at night, were you gathering intelligence? You need to calm down, Dominic said. His voice returning to that dangerous coolness. Calm down? I laughed, and it sounded hysterical. You manipulated me. You orchestrated everything, Victor's humiliation, your dramatic hiring of me, the revelation of what you are. Every single moment was choreographed. Not all of it, he said quietly. But some of it, most of it, all of the beginning of it. I took another step back, shaking my head. I gave you everything. I watched you have a man killed. I accepted your world. And the entire time, I was just an instrument you were playing. Dominic moved toward me, but I held up my hand. Don't, I said. Don't come near me. Ivy, please. His voice cracked slightly. Let me explain. Explain what? I asked bitterly. That you planned this? That from the moment you saw me, you calculated how you could use me? Congratulations, Dominic. You won. You made me believe you loved me while you were actually just. I do love you. The statement hung in the air between us, shocking in its simplicity. Around us, the gala continued, people whispering, phones discreetly filming. You can't say that, I whispered. Not after this. I can say it because it's true. He stepped closer. And for once, he looked genuinely desperate. Yes, I recruited you. Yes, I used you. But somewhere between pretending and planning, it stopped being an operation and started being the only thing that mattered. You became real to me, Ivy. The rest of it, the strategy, the plan, the scheme, it all became insignificant, compared to actually having you. How am I supposed to believe anything you say? You're not, he said. That's the problem. Because now every moment we've shared is tainted, every kiss is a question, every confession is a potential lie. And I did that to you. I architected your trust only to demolish it. His eyes held something I'd never seen before, genuine self-loathing. I used to be the man who could manipulate anyone, he continued, his voice dropping so that only I could hear. The man who never let emotion cloud judgment. And then you walked into my restaurant, and you broke every rule I've ever had. You made me sloppy. You made me want things I wasn't supposed to want. Stop, I said. I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you, he said. If you let me, but I understand if you don't. I understand if you walk away. But we both knew I wouldn't. Because even knowing the truth that he'd orchestrated our meeting, that I'd been carefully selected and cultivated as an asset, I still felt the pull, the magnetic gravity of him. It was worse now, knowing it. Because it meant I couldn't even blame external forces. This was choice. This was willing surrender to a man who'd proven, categorically, that he would use me. I need time, I said finally. You have it. But as we left the gala, his hand finding mine despite my resistance, despite everything, I knew something had fundamentally shifted. I no longer trusted him. But I needed him anyway. And that, I was beginning to understand, was infinitely more dangerous. Chapter 7, The Price of Dominion. They came at 3 a.m. I woke to the sound of breaking glass, a low, dangerous sound that my body understood before my mind did. Something was wrong. Everything was wrong. Dominic wasn't in bed beside me. His side had gone cold. I grabbed the gun from the nightstand. When had he put a gun in the nightstand? And moved toward the bedroom door on instinct. The penthouse was dark except for the ambient light from the city below, and I could hear voices, now multiple voices, some speaking in rapid Italian. The confrontation. Dominic had warned me it might come to this. The Morettis, angry about his refusal to relinquish territory, deciding to settle the matter with violence instead of negotiation. It had been 4 days since the gala, 4 days of cold distance between us, 4 days of us existing in the same space without touching. I'd been waiting for something to break the tension. I hadn't expected it to be literal gunfire. I moved into the hallway, and immediately pressed myself against the wall. Through the darkened living room, I could see shadows moving. Hear the distinctive click of firearms being readied. I counted at least 5 distinct bodies that weren't Dominic's. 5 intruders, in his home. While he was inside. There was a moment, a single crystallized moment where I could have run, could have locked myself in the bedroom and called the police, could have chosen self-preservation over loyalty. I did none of those things. Instead, I moved deeper into the apartment, gun raised. My hands steadier than they had any right to be. Dominic was in the study, standing with his back to the window, completely calm despite being outnumbered. He wasn't armed. He didn't need to be. Standing beside him was Nicola, his second in command, holding a semi-automatic rifle with the ease of someone who'd used firearms more times than they'd used forks. Dominic Ashford, one of the intruders, said, a man with a scarred face I recognized from the gala. A Moretti soldier. Antonio sends his regards. He wanted me to tell you that your refusal to cooperate has consequences. I'm sure he did, Dominic said conversationally. And I'm sure you believed him when he said you'd succeed where diplomacy failed. The scarred man's jaw tightened. You have 10 seconds to surrender the territory, or we execute you and take it. Nicola, Dominic said, not looking away from the man. How many seconds do we have? 5, boss, Nicola replied, and there was something almost amused in his tone. Interesting. Dominic finally glanced toward the hallway where I was hidden, and our eyes met for a fraction of a second. He nodded a single, clear gesture. I stepped out of the shadows, gun raised, and fired. The shot went wide. I wasn't trained for this. Wasn't anything close to trained for this, but the intention was clear. I wasn't a bystander. I was choosing a side. The room descended into chaos. Nicola opened fire on the intruders with the clinical precision of a trained soldier. The sound was deafening, overwhelming. The sharp crack of gunfire echoed through the penthouse. And I watched in horror as men screamed and fell. One of them went down near the window, and I could see blood spreading across the white marble floor, dark and immediate and terrifyingly real. This wasn't a movie. This was the actual cost of Dominic's world. The scarred man turned his weapon toward me, a split-second decision that would have been lethal. I watched it happen as if in slow motion, his arm rotating, the barrel pointing at me, his finger tightening on the trigger. Then Dominic moved. I'd never seen him move like that before. He crossed the space between us in what felt like a single, fluid moment, and his hand clamped down on the scarred man's wrist, with enough force to make the man's fingers spasm. The gun fell. What happened next was pure violence. Dominic's other hand came up, striking the man's temple with the heel of his palm. Once, the man dropped like something had been switched off inside him. Dominic caught his falling body and drove him into the marble floor, with a sound like thunder. When he straightened, the scarred man wasn't moving. Might never move again. The other intruders were already down. Nicola's handiwork, precise and clinical. In 30 seconds, the assault was over. What remained was 5 bodies, and the ringing silence of violence completed. Dominic turned to me slowly, his eyes taking in the gun still raised in my shaking hands. The tremor I couldn't control, the horror I knew must be written across my face. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. They came for you, I replied. I wasn't going to hide. You could have died. His voice was different now, stripped of all control, raw with something that looked like fear. Do you understand that? You could have died because you're stubborn and foolish and won. He moved toward me and I flinched, expecting violence. Instead, he wrapped his arms around me, pulling me close, burying his face in my hair. I would have killed them all, he said. I would have descended into absolute darkness to keep you safe. And that's exactly the kind of leverage the Morettis will use now. You've become my weakness again. I was already your weakness, I said into his shoulder. At least this way, I'm an armed weakness. He pulled back to look at me, and for the first time, I saw him completely without his mask. There was blood on his shirt, his own, from a cut on his cheekbone. There was darkness in his eyes that went beyond the mafia, beyond violence, into something older and more broken. You just killed a man, he said, because I realized, with a small shock, that I must have hit someone. That the gun had recoiled in my hands and my bullet had found its target. No, I said quietly. You did. I was just here. You were complicit, he said, and he said it gently, like it mattered. Like my participation in this violence, however marginal, changed something fundamental about who I was. You're part of this now, fully. There's no going back. I know, I whispered. He kissed me then, tasting like blood and danger and something that might have been desperation. When he pulled away, his forehead rested against mine. I need to make a call, he said. My men will be here within the hour. They'll clean this up. For now, I need you to go shower, get the blood off. And then what? I asked. And then we hunt, he said. Antonio Moretti just declared war. Which means we respond the only way people like us understand, with absolute, undeniable, permanent retaliation. As he moved toward the phone, already shifting into whatever version of himself coordinated violence on a large scale, I stood alone in the study surrounded by evidence of what his world actually meant. This wasn't romance. This was damnation. And I'd just chosen it with both hands. Chapter 8. Breaking. The blood wouldn't wash off. I stood under the scalding water for 30 minutes, watching the pink-tinged water spiral down the drain, but I could still see it on my hands. Still feel it, the visceral knowledge that I'd participated in someone's death. The gun had recoiled. My shot had hit the man in the shoulder, a non-fatal wound, probably, but it had created an opening. It had allowed Dominic to advance. It had allowed the killing to happen more efficiently. I was a murderer. Or I would be, eventually, if I stayed. Because this was just the beginning. This was just the first time. There would be more moments like this, more blood, more choices to make. Each one would strip away another piece of who I'd been until nothing remained but the woman I was becoming. When I finally emerged from the bathroom, Dominic was gone. I found him in the study, sitting behind the mahogany desk, looking at something on his laptop. He'd changed clothes, the blood-stained shirt was gone, replaced by a fresh one. He looked composed, controlled, like we hadn't just experienced violence that should have left him shaken. "What are you going to do?" I asked. He didn't look up. "Make an example." Of Antonio? Of Antonio. Of everyone involved in the assault. Of the soldiers who carried it out. Of anyone in the Moretti family who had knowledge of this attack. I understood what that meant. Systematic, comprehensive, genocidal in scope. How many people will die? I asked. Enough that the message is clear. My territory is not negotiable, and my woman is not to be touched. My woman. Like I was property, like I was a resource to be defended rather than a person to be protected. And me? I asked quietly. What dies in me? He finally looked at me, and his expression was unreadable. Your innocence is gone, he said, as if it was nothing. As if it was a reasonable price to pay for this. That happened the moment you chose to stand beside me instead of run. But everything else, your humanity, your capacity for mercy, your conscience, those can survive if you're careful. If you compartmentalize well enough. That's a lie, I said. And you know it. Every time I do this, every time I'm part of your world, something inside me dies. It doesn't come back, it just gets replaced by something harder. Yes, he said, it does. At least he wasn't pretending otherwise. At least there was that honesty. I need to leave, I said. He closed the laptop slowly. Where will you go? I don't know. Away. Home. Somewhere that isn't this. And your mother? He asked. The woman you live with in that apartment with the broken refrigerator and the neighbor who sells drugs on the corner? You're going to go back to her, living on $30 a week, watching her destroy herself with addiction? That's the alternative to this. His cruelty was surgical, exact. He understood what my weaknesses were and he wielded them like weapons. I deserve that, I said. I deserve a simple life with simple problems. You deserve? He stood, moving around the desk toward me. You're not the kind of person who deserves simplicity, Ivy. You never were. From the moment you walked into that restaurant with anger in your eyes and defiance in your voice, you were always meant for something darker. Something greater. Something that required a man like me. Stop, I said. You felt it, he continued, advancing. That pull, that gravity, when I looked at you through that glass, something shifted. You recognized me, recognized that we were the same two broken people finding each other in the wreckage. I'm not like you. Not yet. He cupped my face in his hands, and the tenderness of the gesture made me want to scream. But you will be. I'll teach you. I'll show you how to survive in this world and not let it completely consume you. And one day, years from now, you'll look back at this moment and understand that it was your salvation, not your damnation. You're trying to convince me that destruction is love. I said. No, he replied. I'm trying to convince you that we're the same type of destruction. And that means we're not destroying each other, we're destroying everything else. He kissed me before I could respond, and the kiss was desperate, raw, the kiss of a man who understood he might be losing me and couldn't accept that. I kissed him back because at this point, what was the alternative? Where would I go? What would I become without him? When we broke apart, both breathing hard, I realized the terrifying truth. I loved him. Completely, irrevocably. Despite everything. Despite knowing what he was. Despite understanding that being with him meant becoming complicit in darkness. Despite the fact that every moment I stayed was another choice to let myself be transformed into something harder and colder. I can't do this, I whispered. Yes, you can. I'll go insane, I said. The contradiction of it. Loving you while hating what you are. Wanting to protect you while knowing you need no protection. Feeling like I'm dying every time you. He pressed his finger to my lips. That's love, Ivy, he said softly. That's what it is in a world like ours. It's not simple, it's not safe. But it's the most real thing either of us will ever experience. Later that night, after he'd made love to me with surprising tenderness, as if violence and softness could coexist in the same person, and I suppose with him, they could. I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The bodies had been removed from the apartment. The blood had been cleaned. It was as if the violence had never happened, except it had, and I would carry the evidence of it inside me forever. Dominic slept beside me, his breathing deep and even, his face softened by sleep into something almost innocent. But there was a gun on the nightstand, and I knew that even in sleep, some part of him was alert to threats. I had a choice to make. Leave and try to rebuild some semblance of a normal life, or stay and surrender completely to this darkness. My hand trembled as I reached for my phone. I was going to run. I had to run. Except every time I opened a mapping app to look at bus routes, I remembered the way he looked at me. Every time I tried to compose a message to my mother, I imagined her face when I told her I was coming home with nothing. And by the time dawn broke, I still hadn't left. Because I already knew, I would never leave. I would stay and watch myself transform into something I didn't recognize. I would become the woman he needed me to be. And the worst part? I was starting to be okay with that. Chapter 9. The point of no return. The warehouse fire started on a Tuesday. I learned about it when Dominic's phone rang at 4 a.m., and he received the news with the kind of silence that came right before violence. He didn't speak. He just listened, his jaw clenching tighter with each second that passed. When he finally hung up, his expression was something I'd never seen before, fear. What happened? I asked. Sitting up in bed. The Morettas hit 3 of my warehouses simultaneously, he said, already moving toward the closet to dress. Fire, explosives. The one in Red Hook had workers inside. My men are trying to assess casualties now. The detachment in his voice was worse than anger would have been. This was what true threat looked like, not rage, but absolute, focused intention. We need to go, he said, pulling on his jacket. Where? Somewhere safe. The Morettis aren't done. This was a demonstration. They'll escalate from here. But he was wrong. They didn't escalate. They did something worse. They took my mother. I learned about it from Dominic's men, who arrived at the penthouse at dawn with news that turned my world to ash. Someone had taken her from her apartment, brutal, efficient, leaving no sign of struggle except for the open window and the chair knocked over. How long? I heard Dominic asking, his voice coming from very far away. 2 hours ago, boss. We've got people searching the neighborhoods now. But if the Morettas have her, they have her, Dominic said. It's exactly the kind of move they'd make. Take the girl's mother, force her to decide between her life and mine. I couldn't breathe. My mother, who'd spent my childhood loving me in the broken way that addiction allowed. Who'd raised me alone in a shoebox apartment, who'd never asked for this. Who was now leveraged because of me. We find her, I said, my voice sounding strange and distant. We find her now, and we don't stop until she's safe. Dominic looked at me with something that might have been pity. That's what they want. He said gently. They want you desperate. Irrational. Easy to control. Which is exactly why we can't give them that. You can't give them that, I said. But I can. I will. She's my mother, and I'm going to find her, and I'm going to burn down anyone who's holding her. Ivy. No, I cut him off. You taught me something when those men came to the penthouse. You taught me that I'm capable of violence. That I can choose complicity and call it love. So I'm choosing this. I'm choosing my mother. And if that means I choose against you, then that's what I choose. For a moment, he looked at me like I was tearing him apart. Find her, he said finally, turning to his men. Every contact, every source, every person with knowledge of Moretti movements. And assemble the team. If they want a war over this girl's mother, we'll give them one. What followed was 18 hours of controlled chaos. Dominic's intelligence network was staggering contacts in the NYPD, surveillance footage from a dozen different sources, informants who reported back with information that felt simultaneously impossible and inevitable. By evening, we had a location, an abandoned factory in Queens where the Morettis were holding my mother. The plan was simple and devastating. We went in at night, guns first, and we didn't stop until everyone who'd touched her was dead. I stood beside Dominic in the weapons room beneath the penthouse, a space I hadn't known existed until now as he distributed firearms and vests to his men. 30 soldiers, all of them cold and professional and capable of the kind of violence that people don't recover from. You're not coming, Dominic said without looking at me. Yes, I am. No. You're not. He finally turned to face me, and his expression was absolute. I can't protect you and execute this operation simultaneously. And if anything happens to you, I lose my mind completely, which means people I love die. Which means we fail. Which means your mother stays imprisoned. So keep me close, I said. Like you always do. I can't. He stepped toward me, and his hands cupped my face with surprising tenderness. Listen to me. I need you to understand something. This is the moment where we decide. You stay behind, safe. And if I don't come back from this, you take my accounts, there's 50 million in liquid assets you can access and you disappear. You rebuild your mother's life somewhere she can't be touched. You have the life I can't give you. And if you do come back, I asked, then I come back to you, and we figure out how to live in a world where we've both done unforgivable things to protect each other. He kissed my forehead. That's when the real work starts, Ivy. That's when we decide if love is enough. I wanted to fight him on this. Wanted to insist on going, on being part of the rescue. But I understood what he was saying. This was how he protected me. Not by keeping me safe, but by keeping me out of the depths where he had to go. Come back to me, I said. I will, he promised. They found my mother in a basement room, and they brought her back to the penthouse by 3 a.m. She was shaking, traumatized, covered in the residue of her captivity. But she was alive. And the moment I saw her, something inside me broke and reformed into a new shape. Because with her safe in the apartment, being tended to by Dominic's private doctor, I realized the full cost of what I'd become. Dominic found me on the balcony as the sun began to rise. He looked broken in a way I'd never seen before. Blood stained his clothes, some of it, I knew, wasn't his. His knuckles were split and bruised. There was a gaze above his left eye that would scar. But his eyes were the worst. They held something that looked like the death of the last piece of his humanity. 37 people. He said quietly. That's how many Morettis we killed to get your mother back. 37. I said nothing, because there was nothing to say. 23 of them were non-combatants, he continued. Family members. Civilians. Children, Ivy. There were children. The weight of those words crashed over me like a wave. You had to. I said weakly. No, I chose to. He turned to look at me, and his expression was devastated. I could have negotiated. Could have paid any price they asked. Could have found a way that didn't end in genocide. But I didn't. Because you were suffering. Because you asked me to burn down anyone who touched your mother. And I burned down their entire family. Dominic, don't, he said. Don't try to absolve me. Don't try to tell me it was necessary. We both know what happened in that factory. We both know what I did. And we both know that you sent me there knowing I would do exactly this. He was breaking down in front of me, the control fracturing. I would do it again, he said, his voice rough. That's the terrible part. If you asked me to do it again tomorrow, I would. Because you matter more to me than humanity. then morality, then my soul. He pulled me close, and I felt him shaking against me. I love you, he said. I love you enough to damn myself. I love you enough to lose everything. And the worst part is, I don't want to be the kind of man who loves like this. I don't want to be this person. But for you, I'm becoming him anyway. I held him as the sun rose over the city, and I understood, finally and completely. We were no longer moving towards something. We had already arrived at it. This was the point of no return. Whatever happened next, whatever price we paid, we would pay it together. Chapter 10. Eternal Darkness. 3 days after the slaughter in Queens, I made a choice that would define the rest of my life. My mother had recovered enough to sit up in bed, to ask questions about what had happened, to understand in her fragmented, addiction-hazed way that her daughter had become something she didn't recognize. She didn't ask me to leave Dominic, didn't beg me to escape. Instead, she looked at me with something that might have been pride and said, "You're stronger than I ever was." It was the worst thing she could have said. Because being strong in Dominic's world meant being complicit. It meant accepting that love and violence weren't opposites, they were the same force, expressed in different currencies. The penthouse felt like a sanctuary and a prison simultaneously. Dominic moved through it like a ghost. The weight of 37 deaths, and the innumerable lives, disrupted by those deaths, settling on his shoulders like a physical force. He barely slept. He barely ate. He existed in a state of controlled devastation that I'd come to understand was his natural state when stripped of the performance he usually maintained. "Come with me," he said one evening, pulling me from my reading. We took his car, a black Bentley with privacy glass that isolated us from the world, to a location in the financial district I'd never been to. The building was nondescript, commercial, the kind of place that nobody paid attention to. Inside was something entirely different. The vault held money, stacks of cash, hundreds of millions of dollars, arranged with almost religious precision. But beneath the money, in a series of secure files, were documents, property deeds, business accounts, instructions. "If something happens to me," Dominic said quietly, "this is yours. Everything. The businesses, the money, the operations. It's all set up so you can maintain it or liquidate it. You can rebuild your mother's life. You can disappear. You can do whatever you want." "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because there's a war coming," he said. "A real one. The Moretti family is fractured, but they're not destroyed. And there are other families who see my recent instability as an opportunity. There are people who think I've become too weak because of you, that I'm no longer rational, that I can be taken down." He turned to face me, and his expression was absolute. "They're right," he continued. "I have become irrational. I destroyed an entire family because you asked me to. I would do it again. That makes me dangerous to the organization I've built, and it makes me vulnerable to people who want what I have." "So what are you saying?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he was saying. "I'm saying that in approximately 72 hours, there's going to be an attempt on my life. I've set it up so it looks like a successful hit from a distance. I'm going to disappear, and I'm going to rebuild myself somewhere else, away from this world. And I'm asking you, do you come with me?" The magnitude of what he was offering crashed over me. He was sacrificing everything. His empire, his power, his position as one of the most feared men in the Mafia. He was surrendering it all because being with me had made him weak, and he'd finally accepted that weakness was worth more than the empire he'd built. "What about your mother?" I asked. "Your operation?" "My mother's gone. She died when I was 16, remember? As for the operation, I have someone who can take over. Someone ruthless enough to maintain it without sentiment." He paused. "Someone who will survive in a world that I'm too human to survive in anymore." "Because of me," I said. "Yes," he agreed. "Because of you. Because somewhere between orchestrating your recruitment and watching you stand beside me during violence, you became the only thing that mattered. And I'd rather have you in obscurity than have everything else without you." He pulled me close, and his forehead rested against mine. "I'm asking you to choose," he said softly. "Choose me. Choose a life that isn't perfect, isn't safe, isn't anything we deserve. Choose the man I become when the mask comes off. Choose darkness with me, but different darkness, the kind where I'm not trying to own an empire. The kind where I'm just trying to be good enough for you. 72 hours later, Dominic Ashford was declared dead. A car accident, the news said. Tragic. He'd been in the vehicle alone, on a private road upstate. There was almost nothing left of him. The funeral was attended by every major player in organized crime. My mother, confused and medicated, sat beside me in a black dress I'd bought her. I held her hand and watched the men who'd known Dominic weep or pretend to weep. Nobody suspected anything. Because Dominic had always been better at disappearing than he was at appearing. We lived for 6 months in a small town in Montana, a place so remote that the world felt abstract and distant. Dominic worked construction during the day. At night, he studied for his GED, something he'd never bothered with before. It was the most boring thing I'd ever witnessed. And I loved every second of it. My mother's health improved in the clean mountain air. She started attending AA meetings in a church basement that smelled like coffee and hope. She got a job at the local diner, nothing glamorous, but honest work that gave her purpose. Dominic and I got married in that church. With just my mother and the Reverend present. There were no diamonds, no elaborate ceremony, no performance. Just him, looking at me like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life, and me, understanding that I'd finally found the thing I'd always been searching for. It wasn't the kind of love story people told. It was dark and damaged and built on a foundation of violence and manipulation, and choices that would never be forgiven by any standard, moral framework. But it was ours. One evening, sitting on the porch of our small house, watching the mountains turn purple in the setting sun, Dominic said something that crystallized everything. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Any of it?" I thought about Victor throwing coffee in my face, thought about the moment I saw Dominic through frosted glass, thought about the gala, the revelation of manipulation, the violence that followed. Thought about the blood that would never fully wash off, no matter how long I stood under scalding water. "No," I said honestly. "I don't regret it. Not even the person you've become. Especially not that," I said. "Because the person I've become is someone who survived. Someone who loved something darker than herself and didn't lose herself in the process. Someone who has a mother who's rebuilding her life. Someone who's no longer invisible." He pulled me close, and we sat in silence as the sun disappeared completely, leaving only stars. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For choosing me. For choosing darkness. For choosing a future I didn't think was possible." The truth was, I hadn't really chosen anything. I'd simply surrendered to gravity. I'd acknowledged that some people were meant to orbit each other, no matter how destructive the intersection. But maybe that was love, in the end. Not the choosing, but the surrendering. Epilogue. 3 years later, I received a visitor at the diner where I waitressed, because apparently I had a destiny involving coffee service. It was Nicola, Dominic's former second in command. "Your husband wanted you to know," Nicola said, sliding a photograph across the table, "that the Moretti family is finished. Completely. The last surviving member was eliminated last week. There's no more threat, you're safe." The photograph showed a man I didn't recognize, dead on a warehouse floor. "And he wanted you to know," Nicola continued, "that he doesn't regret any of it, not the empire he built, not the people he destroyed, not the man he became in your name." After Nicola left, I showed Dominic the photograph. He looked at it for a long moment, then tore it into pieces. "That part of my life is done," he said. "He's done. I don't want to know about it anymore." But I could see it in his eyes, the darkness never really left. It just learned how to be quiet, how to be patient, how to wait for a moment when it might be needed again. And that was the final truth of our story. You don't escape darkness, you learn to live beside it. You learn to love it, even, because darkness understands you in ways that light never could. We'd both been broken and damaged and unsuitable. We'd found each other in the wreckage and built something neither of us expected, a life that was neither dark nor light, but a complex interweaving of both. It would never be clean, it would never be simple. But it was ours. And that made it sacred.